Hello and welcome to my doll space. I had an entire video planned today. I was going to take one of my dolls, probably Sammy, honestly, to the zoo and then chill and sort of put together, because I really like the editing bit, a fun visit to the zoo type of video with one of my dolls. But I had minor family emergency situation last weekend and it has been smoky all week, and honestly I don't really want to go to the zoo when I can't breathe. So instead I am going to do something that I'm sure tons of people have done, but you know, it's a two cakes meme situation, and go through my ranking of American Girl historical characters and dolls. I'm gonna factor in the doll and also their story into this. Of course I'm going in chronological order because of course I am. And forgot to put it up. Okay, there we go. My hair isn't touching my neck. I can breathe now. So, I am going in chronological order because of course I am, which means I'm starting with Kaya because of course I am. Which feels like a good time to bring out Jossie again because I gave her her own modern characterization, but she was originally a Kaya doll. And I love the face mold. I really like that it's unique. I really like that the reason it's unique is that they were being culturally sensitive, because that's a wonderful thing to take into account. I'm going to have to look up some of the dolls, but I did definitely read Kaya's books as a kid. I do definitely have them. I really enjoyed that. Well, I do think it's nice and appropriate that they have a Native American character as one of the earlier ones, because obviously that's most of American history, but not a thing that everyone likes to acknowledge. It's not so much my thing now, but as a kid, I was really, really into horses. And so I will get more into the complexities of that with Felicity. But as for Kaya, I thought it was cool that one of her things is riding horses. I thought it was cool and interesting anytime I got to learn about cultures and traditions that I was previously unfamiliar with. I was a big historical novel kid. Of course I was. Basically, I love Kaya, and I'm gonna go ahead and put her up there right at the top, because she's amazing and wonderful. All right, who's next? Felicity. So I know what I just said about horses, but I never liked Felicity. I feel more justified in that now, but I also know she's very popular, and the reasons I disliked her as a kid had nothing to do with morality. I thought she was boring. The main thing I just remember is that she was a wealthy girl and really into horses, but in retrospect, the fact that they sort of casually glossed over that obviously the servants her family has are slaves, and that this is only 10 years after Kaya's. So assuming they all exist in the same universe, Kaya is all of 20 at this point, and we're supposed to root for Felicity and her family and general community taking over this land, basically. So that's not cool. So I am actually going to put her very low for a multitude of reasons. So she is my first on the bottom, so really got a split here. I also just think that Felicity looks boring. She has nothing particularly interesting going on with her face mold or hair. I know, that wasn't much. I don't have too much to say about her. All right, here is where it gets interesting, because Caroline was put out after I stopped reading them as a kid. So I have never read her books, so I'm gonna have to look her up. She's from 1812 though, And right off the bat, that bothers me because they started doing the years that end in 4 thing. And I'm autistic, okay? I like consistency. I liked that they were from wildly different time periods, but always from the 4th year, the year ending in 4 of a decade. Technically, that's the 5th year of the decade. And I liked the 6-book format where it was the same steps in their lives in a different context every time. Anyway, all right. So Caroline she lives in Sackett Harbor, New York, on the shores of Lake Ontario. I knew she lived on a lake. I know her dad does boat stuff. That was about all that I already know. She's brave and independent. That's good. Pretty standard for American Girl, but also good. I gotta remember to look between you and my computer. Let's look at her books. Is there a brief description here? There is not. There is a chapter by chapter summary. Okay. She wants her dad to build her a boat. That's cute. She wants to be a captain despite being a girl. That's cute too. In a good way, not a condescending way. Oh, right. This is a War of 1812 one. That makes the 12-year make sense. I still don't like it, but it would be hard to do a story about the War of 1812 in 1814. I have to give them that. Her dad and older brother are taken prisoner by the British when the war starts because they were all out on a ship. He manages to convince the British sailors to return her and her friend home because they're just little girls. And then it's basically about the war. And at the end of the first book, her dad and brother are still taken prisoner. That looks good. And it's an important bit of American history that is often overlooked. I don't feel like I can give someone a top rating if I haven't actually read their book. I do think I have a collection of her books because I like to collect them, but I have so many books to read. I am literally in the middle of 3 adult books right now. I don't have time to also read the kids' books. But I'm going to say that she is good. She sounds like a good character, like a necessary point in history to talk about, and I think she's pretty. And I really like her dress. Okay, Josefina is next. I probably shouldn't admit that I fully grew up calling her Josefina. I knew she spoke Spanish. It did not ever even click in my mind that obviously her name is pronounced in a Spanish way. I did have her books though, and I did read them, and I enjoyed the story. I remember thoroughly, also, again, being really interested in a culture that, the same as many Native American cultures, still exists today and is nearby physically, but is not mine. I find that really interesting. Now is probably a good point to tell you that I have a degree in archaeology. I don't use it very much, but I do find it fascinating. So I like her story. As far as I remember, it was handled well, but to be fair, I was a child, so there may have been issues I didn't notice. I also think that she is pretty. I really like her face mold. And I really like her face mold on her specifically, and I really like the way that her hair is often done up, and I like her clothes. I like the detail on them, and yeah, I don't know if I have a ton else to say there. I feel like I'm going to end up talking longer about the books that I haven't read because I have to look them up, but as far as I remember, which is vague outlines more than specific plot details, I really enjoyed her story. So I am going to put her in the good category, though not the best one, because I liked it, but it didn't haunt me so that I kept thinking about it. Um, all right, Cecile and Marie Grace are next, and I will do them each separately. I do have their books, I know that for sure, but I haven't actually read them yet either. Um, on a technical level, I don't love that they're 1853, but to be fair, Kirsten was already 1854, so I'm not going to count that against them. I think the idea of having two different main characters of the series with different experiences of it instead of making one of them a best friend was a really good decision. I think it's really interesting just right off the bat. I'm going to start with Cecile merely because she's first on my list, and also their names are French, so there's an excellent chance that I'm not actually pronouncing it correctly. Sorry.
Cécile. Cécile.
Let's see, personality. Try not to slouch too much. I'm bad about that. Cecile comes from a well-to-do and highly regarded family in the New Orleans Free People of Color community. To have your second Black character be wealthy and free before the Civil War, I think is an excellent balance for Addie, who I love, and I will get to her, but I do think that it's important, and also to show the diversity of history and culture and the way that people lived / live in the US. And yeah, so I appreciate that. Let's see, she's confident, outgoing, curious, and loves the limelight and likes to be original. She shows interest in traveling and adventures, loves hearing the excited adventurous tales her grandpère tells her, and is in awe of Marie Grace's experiences. Unlike Marie Grace, Cecile is tutored at home rather than attending a school with others. She finds her lessons boring and especially dislikes writing. Can't relate, but fair enough. I like her doll. I think that she's pretty. I enjoy her face. I enjoy her pretty curls. She has her own meat book, so we're gonna go with that first. They didn't actually include a summary of her book in the wiki. I am used to the Doctor Who wiki that is so thorough. It has, an entry on water and limbs and everything that has ever been put out, basically, with no summaries for the rarer and less looked at things. But so I don't love that, but that's not really the fault of American Girl or the dolls. So I am going to go based on what I know of her and put her in the good category. Let's look at Marie Grace, who is her best friend, so also from 1853, so I'm not going to complain about that again. Let's look at her personality. She is more of a loner. She used to be bold, but after her mother died and she and her father moved around the country quite a lot, she grew more shy, which is understandable, and she feels kind of out of place, best friends with her dog. While not as good at French as she used to be, she does the household shopping because it's the 1800s and she's the only girl in the house now, and so she's good at math. Okay, so basically she's smart and also caring and also kind of timid and isolated. That sounds like a good counter to Cecile being more outgoing. I like that despite those personalities, they didn't make the more outgoing girl the better one automatically at singing. Her doll doesn't do a whole lot for me. Her face is fine. The basic American Girl faces are better than the basic Our Generation faces, to be fair. And also, I think a lot of it for me is that either I need an interesting face mold or something interesting about the hair. A boring face mold is fine. I have some with fairly standard typical face molds, but I always give them good hair that creates an interesting look. I don't want something that looks generic, and I do think she looks a little bit generic. Let's see if it says anything about her book. It does not, which in context is probably good. I would take offense if it had summaries for her chapters and not Cecile's. But so not knowing a whole lot of what happens, but going on that, I like her personality. I like her bit of the story. Her illustration is pretty, but I'm going to put her in the meh category, I think, just because her doll is so uninteresting to me, and I did say that was going to be part of it. Who's next? Kirsten. I remember hers really well. I don't know why. Maybe I read it more than once. Yeah, I like the way that they told the immigrant settler experience. I liked that they showed how frightening it is to be in a completely new place. I like that they showed the details of how a one-room schoolhouse worked. Presumably still does in some places. I, again, liked it was a very unique and interesting way of having all the same beats of life. She, like most of them, was of course Christian, but because she didn't start off American, she did it in a different way. So you still got some traditions that the typical American child might not know about. I do think her doll is pretty. Her face isn't the most interesting, but her braids make up for it. It's a very, very fun style, and I like it. And yeah, I wish they had done a little bit more with it, but I like the way that her version of best friend character was a Native American girl that she met in the woods, and they didn't share any language, but were able to play together in the way that children do anyway. And I think that that is sweet, and that she felt isolated in her community because she was new there, and it's an acknowledgement that all of this was happening at the same time. And I like that. So I'm going to put her in the good category because I feel like it. That brings us to Addie. I remember hers really well too. From reading it as a kid, but I also think that I absolutely read her first book again as an adult because it's that good. I definitely own her books. I think I actually owned like 1.5 sets of her books until I pared them down. Because, you know, they used to have sets of just the first 3 books sometimes, and I had those for a really long time. From when I was a kid, actually. I still have the Felicity books I had when I was a kid because, sure, I don't love her, but she's still an American Girl character, and I like completionism. And I had the first half of Addie's series, although I think that when I got one of the books that had all of her books in it, I might not have kept that and given it to the thrift store. Anyway, I remember her story really well, so I don't need to look it up. She starts off with her family enslaved, but very early in the first book, she and her mom are able to escape and go live in the North, which is hard because they still deal with racism, and she has to go to school for the first time, and her mom has to work really hard as a seamstress, and she's really worried about her dad and siblings. And then the Civil War happens, and they're still separated, which was a big thing. I'm not really qualified to talk much about this, but I know that family separation was a big issue, and that there were all sorts of classified ads trying to find people in the aftermath. I really like her story. I like the way that it's told. I like the way that she gets to learn and then realizes how much there is to learn and becomes really into it. I like how she is shown to be clever before she can read. I like that she was one of the earliest American girls. Did I say she's from 1864? That's probably obvious because of the Civil War, but um, I like that she is one of the earliest American girls, that they thought that one of the most important bits of history to talk about was slavery and the Civil War and what it did to people directly, and not just in a distant, my brother went to fight sort of way. I also like her doll. I will say that I like her face mold. I know that it has become kind of one of the standard ones, but like she was the first, so it wasn't then. And I like the shape of her cheeks, and I like the shape of her eyes that is caused by the shape of her cheeks, and she looks sweet and happy. And I also like her hair, so I am going to put her up in the best category. Samantha, 1904. I remember her stuff really well too because I probably read them repeatedly as a kid. I liked her a lot more than Felicity, definitely. I like that in a story about a very well-off girl, they still dealt with poverty and talked about hardships. And I do like that she had a less conventional family, with being taken care of by her grandmother. A lot of the details of their life were less culturally interesting to me because it was wealthy turn of the century American. There wasn't that much going on. Her doll is fine. Her face is all right. It's not the boringest face mold possible, I don't think. It is possible that some of these, I will say this one is boring and this one is nice for the same face mold, because I'm face blind, and that definitely transfers over to dolls, and like the eye color and the hair and my preconceived feelings for the doll will have an effect. Her hair is fine, realistic, pretty, but nothing really special, so I'm probably gonna put her in the meh category. Which brings us to Rebecca. Okay, so she is probably my favorite. So the thing is, Rebecca came out when I was 13, and okay, now I have short-ish blue hair and a beard, and I am chubby and don't really look anything like her. But when I was 13, other than the fact that I'm covered in freckles, I did look a lot like Rebecca. And I wanted her, and I eventually got her as an adult with my tax refund money. I got like her whole big bundle. She is not behind me, you will note. I decided that she looked perfect for one of the doctors in my doctor project, and that I was no longer that into her. However, she's very important to me thinking about, and she is the only Jewish American girl, which is also important to me. And I like her story. I like that they'd already done an immigration story, and this is from the opposite direction, where she was already here and is immersed in a culture she knows and is comfortable in, mostly. Her cousin has no idea what's going on, and so she feels at times frustrated and at times powerful because she can help. And I like that it dealt with not just that, but also workers' rights issues, and also on a smaller detail level, but one that was very important to me, is it dealt with making Christian-themed crafts in school. And we wouldn't make it compulsory if a kid didn't want to make a craft on religious basis now, but that's about the only difference now. They're still everywhere all December for Christmas, which is really awkward if your family doesn't celebrate Christmas. So I appreciated that, and I do think she's really pretty. I love her curls. I love her clothes. I'm definitely keeping her clothes. So she is going in the best category. I have to line up my chart to match my hand movements. That's gonna be fun. All right, who does that put next? Claudie. All right, as I said, I haven't read her books yet, but I have seen a fair bit about them. And from what I can understand, it's a very good story. I like that she is the fourth. I know I said third last time. I forgot about Melody. Sorry. She is the fourth historical Black character that they did. And all of them have been in very different cultural contexts while all being very American. I actually have her here. I like her face. I still don't like the painted on lashes, but everything else about it is sweet. I like her eyebrows. I like her eyes. I like the way her curls are done. I really like her clothes. The only things that lose her points are that, one, she didn't get a 6-book series, and I get that they just sort of don't do that anymore, and they haven't done that for a long time, but I really liked the format, although everything I've heard about her books is good. I do like that she has at least 2 of them. Like, they didn't just do 1 and then forget about her. And 2, she's from 1922, and I don't know if that's relevant for a specific event, but it does annoy me a little bit. Why is she not from 1924? However, that's not really enough to move her down a notch. And because I haven't read her books yet, I'm going to put her in the good category instead of the best one. But I really love her. Kit is next. Kit is another one that I read as a kid and liked because I related to her. I, too, am very into writing. I actually have a typewriter now. I loved her curiosity. I loved that it was a history that was long ago enough to be different and interesting, but still recent enough to be recognizable in my own life. I like her cute little scooter. I like that it dealt with the Great Depression, which is an important thing to teach kids about. I like her doll. Her face isn't the most interesting, but her hairstyle is really unique for almost every doll having long hair, and then she doesn't, and that's cute. And I like the way that they did that. So I'm going to put her in the best category. After that is Nanea. And now that I've thought about it, I do get why she's in 1941, because 1944 would be too late to do the kind of story they were doing. However, it bugs me just a little bit. I also have her here so I can show you. Her painted on lashes aren't as dark, so I don't mind them as much. Her face mold taken on its own is not the most exciting I've ever seen, but it is definitely pretty. And I like her hair a lot. I like the shade of that black brown that they did and the way that it curls. I like that. And I also think that it is very important to have multiple perspectives on the same era in history. So I do think that having 2 World War II stories is justified, especially with one of them being a Hawaiian girl and it being a very major and actually fairly recent part of our history. Which brings me to Molly, and I'm gonna make some people mad here. I do like her, but I don't love her as much as a lot of people seem to. I think that her doll is very recognizable, but otherwise pretty bland. So not generic, I suppose, because the braids are very recognizable, but not very interesting. I do think her story is important and also kind of was inevitable. I like that they were able to keep it American because it is American Girl while bringing in a British girl so that you got a more upfront experience because Molly was never going to actually see the war. I could make a point about over-patriotism, but to be fair, that's probably realistic, and there's no reason a 10-year-old girl would question it, so I'll let that slide. So for that, I am gonna put her in the good category instead of the best one because I think she's important, but she doesn't speak hugely to me. Okay, Mary Ellen. So she's another one that I haven't actually read. Um, I do know a fair bit about her story, but I'm going to look it up to double check and make sure I'm right. Okay, I have looked that up, and I have 3 major complaints about her story. One, she had polio and has some lasting effects from it, but if you're going to have a character in the 50s that had polio, I do think that you should make their disability have an effect on the story. And as far as I can tell, it mentions that she's a little weaker than everyone else and she has cold sensitive lungs, but she's still a fast runner. She's still very active. I would have liked someone who at least wore those awful old leg braces that kids who were only partially paralyzed with polio used to have. 2, her stories seem less historically significant than the others and more, oh, look at the fun of the 50s. Like, obviously there's plot, but the plot does seem to revolve more around the kind of relatable shenanigans kids get into, like losing the dog or winning the spelling bee, than this is what's going on in the country right now and how it's having an effect on people. 3, of course, this was post 6-book series, which is always going to annoy me. So I do like her doll. I like her 50s clothes. I think they're very cute. I love that dress she comes in. Her face is generic, but her hair is very pretty. I like the way they did her bangs. And pretty much for that alone, I'm going to put her in the meh category instead of the bad one. All right, that brings us to Melody, who, again, I did not read, but I know enough about to do this without looking. Technically, I have the same problem as with Mary Ellen, where Melody is from 1964, and her main issue is centered around her singing and I think her picking up a new interest and being uncertain of the 2. However, I'm going to let that slide a little bit more because I don't know, it annoys me less. She was their 3rd ever Black character, and in a different, very different American culture scenario to the previous 2. And to be fair, I suppose Cecile and Marie Grace were more about showing that time period than one big specific event. And I think Melody is allowed to be about that too, especially because said cultural context lives less in our white zeitgeist than the white kid in the 50s bit does. I would have forgiven all the rest of Mary Ellen's things, I think, if they had made her invisible disabilities are valid. I have them myself. But in this case, they went with polio specifically. So I think if they had made her need some sort of mobility aid, then the story would have been about that. And it would be okay that there weren't high stakes. So I am going to forgive that for Melody. That said, the musical thing doesn't speak to me. It's allowed to exist. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's not my thing. I find it kind of boring. So even though I like her doll, that she is very 60s. I don't remember which face mold she has, but I do know that I like her hair a lot. I'm gonna put her in the meh one just because she's not my thing. Okay, Julie. So, from 1974. My biggest issue with her, again, is that her story isn't about a moment in history. It's not about look at the way that people used to live or look at this big historical moment that happened. It's just a girl who lives in the 70s. And I think there is some talk of feminism, but mostly it's a low stakes middle grade book set in the 70s. And I find her doll very boring. Some of her clothes are awesome, to be fair. I have her vest and pants outfit. Some 70s clothes rocked. But her doll herself didn't really have anything to make her stand out. Courtney from 1986. Right off, she's not from 1984. Why not? You could have made her from 1984. Second off, we all know that this was an early American Girl nostalgia grab, even though some of her stuff is cute. Third off, her story is low stakes, which they seem to have shied away from the big historical stakes stories. Anyway, I think Courtney is boring. I think that she looks boring, and I think that her story is boring, and I think that most of her clothes are boring. So Courtney is also going on the bad ranking because I have negative interest in her without some interesting historical story to go along. And that's when we get to Nikki and Isabel from 1999. And I know a bit less about their actual stories, but I know just enough to know that they're kind of that, oh, it's the millennium, it's Y2K, which is why they're 1999, not 1994, but that still annoys me. And also, oh, they're twins, but they're different and they have to learn to be their own person, which is fine. I used to read Sweet Valley High, but that's not what American Girl is meant to be. And if you're gonna do low stakes, mostly modern stories, that's what the Girl of the Year is supposed to be. It's okay to have those relatable stories that kids can read and just get and see themselves in. But that was what the modern girls were supposed to be. The historical ones are educational in a fun way. 1999 is not history. Even though it feels like a long time ago to someone who's young, I do feel like it needs to be at least 35 or 40 years ago to count as history. And 1999 is 27 years ago. Yes, I don't just say that because I was alive then. They're capitalizing on Y2K nostalgia. And I have a lot of that myself, but that doesn't make it a historical story worth talking about. Yeah? So I'm not even separating them, partly because I don't know what the differences are, partly because I'm just annoyed and kind of done talking about this because the last 4 that I've talked about have been annoying to me. Melody was the last one that was I don't like her, but my reasons aren't valid. She's not a bad character. All the ones after that, I'm kind of over. So they're going in the bottom bad column. If you are still here, thank you for sitting around and watching me rank American Girl dolls. And this was fun, and I will see you next time. And I hope that you're having a good time with your friends, real and imaginary. Bye.